Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
And good Friday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is Friday, March the 20th. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by going to weather.gov/Alaska. Just click on the map there and it'll take you to your local forecast information no matter what part of Alaska you're watching from tonight. The weather info line is always open at 800-472-0391. Find us on the internet, find us on Facebook, find us on Twitter and YouTube, and of course your daily afternoon map briefings. One of my proudest achievements there that I like to share with everybody every day is the short, quick, brief outlook there on the surface weather maps there. It is an easy way to get a sneak peek at what's coming your way for the next 2 days, including tonight. Check that out easily. It's about 2.5 minutes, and it works great on your cell phone. So no matter if you're in the Mat-Su valleys, or if you're up north, or if you're out on the YK Delta, you can get that on your cell phone. If you got a cell signal, just go to YouTube and look for NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks. And at the end of the day, if you want to watch the whole show, you can certainly do that too. Just look for AKwx TV, and you'll get Alaska weather on YouTube. So lots of easy ways to get the information that you need. Now, if you're on the northwestern Arctic coast from Wainwright all the way down toward Point Hope, you can get a wind chill advisory, I should say. It could feel like 48 below. And, you know, with the winds coming out of the north and east up to 30, 45 miles per hour, it's going to feel pretty chilly up there. So plan for that to continue at least until about 6, 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Out across the west now. As you look at the Bering Sea coast, you'll notice that north and easterly offshore flow that's continuing to push off the YK Delta. As that happens, we're seeing very dry conditions mainly across the Bering Sea coast, but out across the west we start to get into a little bit more of the terrain, and because of that a better chance for some showers there. Mainly snow west of Adak and Atka. Eastward, a little bit better chances. It's still warm enough for some rainfall to continue. You'll also notice a lot of the Pacific waves are traveling from west to east, generally you know, several hundred miles south of the Aleutian, so none of this looks like it's in any danger of swinging to the north at this point. It's all controlled by this upper level low pressure system that's sitting here across the Gulf of Alaska and stirring the pot across the Gulf of Alaska and wrapping around kind of the leftovers through the west coast and the southern Bering Sea. Here's a look at the map now. As across the Gulf of Alaska, you can see several waves, and they're just hit and miss all the way around. And I think our friends at the National Weather Service office in Juneau were counting them the other day. They came up with about 8 at one time that were just kind of in this general vicinity. It was pretty impressive, all the number of circulations. You can go to Facebook and see that. Low pressure sitting south and west of Sitka is kind of the main player right now. This is drawing up some more weather, a little bit more drier weather now into central and southern parts of southeast. This will rotate through. It's had some rainfall, but it's also got cold enough air around the northern parts of the Gulf Coast that you might get a little bit of light snow in places like Yakutat tonight. Up across the north in Bettles, we're seeing some light snow, maybe an inch or so as we get into the next 24 hours there. Most likely, though, most of the interior locations are going to be fairly dry thanks to this weather pattern. The focus for precipitation is really going to stay right here along the coastline there from southeast to the north, to the northwestern Gulf, maybe even into the Alaska Peninsula. By and large, most places anywhere else are going to have a pretty dry weekend as we go. Low pressure was down to 991 millibars across central and eastern parts of the Gulf. A few showers there lurking through southeast as that front lifted north and west today. All the white that you see on the map, most of that is snow cover. Snow showers across the middle Yukon Valley, and blowing snow will continue to be an issue for some areas across the north and eastern Arctic coast. Now, as we get out across central and eastern parts of Dutch Harbor, or the Aleutians, I should say, some light drizzle was seen there, but again, the moisture content is pretty low, so not a huge problem right now, and just kind of leftovers slopping their way through the central and eastern Bering Sea. A low pressure across the northern Gulf Coast, 997 millibars tonight, dragging the leftovers of a front across southeastern Alaska. Some pockets of rainfall there. The further north you go, though, once again around Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather, you might run into some snow with that. Out across the west, we see periods of rain and snow mixing up, predominantly mixing towards snow by the early morning hours, and as you get into the afternoon tomorrow, a lot of that will probably switch back over to rain. Blowing snow will be a problem across the northwestern coast, and you know what? I believe I said a wind chill advisory for the northwest coast. I meant a winter weather advisory for blowing snow. Let me get that right. Blowing snow advisory for the northwestern coast, so my apologies there. Out across the northern coast, pockets of light rainfall. That continues into southeast, perhaps a little steadier in the afternoon. Out across the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, periods of rain and snow will mix once again, and just hit and miss up and down the western coast. We've kind of got a little boundary still holding right here, and that may be the focusing mechanism for those snow showers. As we get into Sunday, here's a boundary. It's kind of firming up a little bit more now, a little bit warmer across the east and colder out across the west, and really not moving very much. So along that line, once again, we get those chances for snow showers all the way from Kotzebue down toward Unalakleet and the YK Delta as well. Now, high pressure is going to set up across the Copper River Basin. It's not going to be a terribly stout system, but strong enough to control the circulation at least a little bit. And with that, we'll see some drier air work its way out across the eastern and southern sections of southeastern Alaska. That air moves into the Gulf of Alaska, but we still have this flow pushing right up into the Kenai Mountains and Prince William Sound, all the way eastward toward Juneau and Haines and Skagway. What it looks like right now is, at least tonight and into tomorrow, the snow level around Haines and Skagway is going to run around 1,000 feet or so and might drop to about 6,000 feet by tomorrow morning, and then probably lift back up. You know the drill, but chances are you're going to see at least a little bit of rain below 1,000 feet as we go into the next couple days. Snow showers are still going to be an issue out around the YK Delta to the Pribilofs. And for most of the central and eastern chain, plan on at least a little bit of rain as we go through the weekend there. Most of what you'll see again will just be kind of passing through from time to time and maybe mixing with snow. Now, temperatures today in southeast, fairly uniform, into upper 40s in many cases. As you get up toward Haines today, temperatures topped out around 50. Upper 40s for Juneau, mid 40s around southern southeast, Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock. Petersburg even, fairly mild today. Hyder was about 46. Sitka also running in the upper 40s, and not a whole lot of rain there today, it looked like by the observations. 47 in Yakutat, mid to upper 40s around Prince William Sound, 44 in Anchorage and Kenai 43, 47 for Homer. Fairbanks was also fairly mild. Your mild weather will continue into the weekend there, so if you'll like that, but just watch out for the refreezing at night. We understand that the area roadways are having some issues there again with the melt out during the day and then the refreezing at night. It's, you know, the breakup kind of season there, so just, you know, check yourself so you don't wreck yourself, as they say, right? 23 in Arctic Village, up north around Anaktuvuk Pass. The observation not reporting today, so we'll move up the road just a little bit more toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. That was 0 at 3 o'clock. 5 below for Barrow, down the road toward Atkasuk. 7 below Kotzebue Sound. Single-digit temps and mid-teens up toward Kivalina today at 14. 24 in Nome. Unalakleet saw temps in the mid-teens today. 37 in McGrath, also trying to melt things out just a little bit more. Sparevon was 43. Bethel had 38. Southwest in the lower to mid-40s around Bristol Bay. Lake Iliamna up to 46 degrees, 45 in Kodiak. The Alaska Peninsula in the 30s and 40s, 29 in St. Paul, 32 for St. George, and mid to upper 30s for the central and western Aleutians. Now, overnight low temperatures will drop into the single digits and teens. Southwest, you're looking at temps back in the mid to upper 20s. Closer to the freezing point around King Salmon, above it in Kodiak Island, upper 40s for the chain, upper 30s for the chain and the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast in the upper 30s to about 40 degrees down around Ketchikan. Up north for the Arctic coast, anywhere from 5 to 15 below. Kotzebue Sound looking at temperatures closer to, if not below 0. Shishmaref 8 below. A high temperature tomorrow of 1 there, 13 in Kotzebue, 30s and 40s for the middle Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley. Lower 40s for most of South Central, including Prince William Sound, 43 in Kodiak, mid-40s around Bristol Bay, south of King Salmon anyway. Once you get north of Dillingham, temperatures will cool into the lower to mid-30s. That includes Bethel, and out around Nunivak Island could be as cool as 26 degrees, 8 for St. Lawrence Island. Flying weather tomorrow will include some IFR conditions for the inner coastlines for southeastern Alaska. Elsewhere, MVFR conditions at least in the morning hours. A little bit better chance of seeing VFR conditions for the eastern part of Prince William Sound. However, note this tiny little spot right here on the eastern side of Portage. pass, you'll be looking at least some IFR throughout the day. On the other side, though, Cook Inlet looks pretty good. Same goes for areas around Bristol Bay until you get to the peninsula and the eastern Aleutians, also looking for some IFR conditions there. And for the lower and even lower sections of the middle Yukon Valley, IFR there, as well as parts of the Arctic coast. Here's your pass conditions now. As you would expect with this weather pattern, Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass look pretty good tomorrow, so enjoy your flying there. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, conditions look fairly nice. VFR conditions are expected. And as we get into Rainy Pass, MVFR probably in the morning for the western side, but most of the pass, as well as areas well off to the east, should all be VFR. So it'll just be after you get out of the pass you might run into some MVFR in the morning. Rainy Pass looks, or Windy Pass looks pretty good at this point. VFR there. Isabel Pass, also VFR. Mentasta Pass, we expect some changes over toward marginal conditions as we get into the afternoon and evening hours. Tanita Pass expected to be VFR. And Portage Pass, there it is. IFR conditions develop during the midday and afternoon hours there. So if you're going one way and plan to come back later on in the afternoon, keep your eye on that. Conditions could change. Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to lean over toward IFR as we go through the day. Now here's your freezing levels. That warmer air that we were seeing across most of the central and eastern Gulf is kind of spread out a little bit more. So it's a little less focused right here across south and eastern parts. But it is spreading westward into Bristol Bay. Those levels as high as 2,000 feet. The surface freezing line hovering close to, if not just a hair south of the Pribilofs at this point. Icing potential is really hit and miss. There is moisture to be had. Most of it's in the Gulf and then along that western boundary that we saw lurking there. And so with that, we'll see a couple areas that could have some light to isolated moderate. Haven't seen a whole lot of reports today. One of those places to keep an eye on would be areas around Bettles again with snow showers in the air. Possibility for some icing potential there, but really hit and miss. Most likely you'll be running into light icing if you run into it at all. Most of that above 3,000 feet in the west, about 5,000 to 6,000 foot in the east, and above 6,000 feet as you head northward toward the Bering Strait. Here is our friend the jet stream, and right now the main player, the driver of our weather systems coming west out of the Pacific, taking a dive well south of Alaska. This is the weather superhighway, and it is not over Alaska at this point. So what do we have? We have low pressure stirring the pot across the Gulf of Alaska, and all these surface weather systems just keep rotating around right in here. And occasionally some of that moisture gets a little bit further north. Occasionally some of that gets lofted into the western Bering Sea coast. But then we have our another friend, the polar jet is working across the northern sections of Alaska. Wind speeds considerably slower there, and the weather pattern not as strong to allow cold air to drop southward at this point. So most of what we're getting controlled by that low pressure system there. 9,000 feet, we have that south and easterly flow working its way up across Haida Gwaii, anywhere from about 25 to 35 knots. Light winds across the Yukon Valley again, 5 to 20 knots there at the strongest across the northwestern coast, and wind speeds pretty light across the Aleutians as well. As we get into the 3,000 foot level, you see low pressure across the Gulf again underneath that parent upper level low. South and easterly winds moving across the Gulf. Wind speeds are pretty light across south central, only 5 knots there. That continues to kind of meander its way up across the Brooks Range. Wind speeds for the central and eastern coast, 30 to 35 knots, and east and northeasterly winds west of St. Matthew around 10 to 15 knots there. Another circulation fairly close to Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, around 5 to 20 knots there. Turbulence potential again is pretty minimal. The main weather focus is really well to our south, so we have generally light winds. We don't have a whole lot of fast winds squeezing through gaps, and save for an isolated case or two. So light to isolated moderate, probably the best we can come up with west of the Bering Strait below 3,000 feet. Around the Pribilofs, there could be some turbulence. Most of that will also be light below 5,000. Below 4,000 feet across the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, maybe a little bit more into the northern Yukon, and also on the northern side of that low pressure system that we saw working up from southeast, we could have some stronger winds there, some of those low-level jet winds there just across the coastline and maybe poking their way into areas closer to Cordova and all the way out to Yakutat, maybe into Crosstown. Most of that will be below 5,000 feet. So again, keep your eyes on that if you're flying around. Visibility looks pretty good in most places. Turbulence and icing, not too bad. So maybe it's a great flying weekend. No matter where you go, be safe and check the weather before you go. We'll have a check of your marine weather forecast here in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Hangar Flying. I'm Mary O'Connor with the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Thank you to Alaska Public Media for their support, and thanks to our viewers for tuning in. This evening, we are back with Monique Stowers, who is an air traffic controller. Welcome back to the show, Monique.
Thank you, Mary.
As we mentioned on our last show, Monique is currently an air traffic controller at Merrifield Tower. Besides just controlling traffic, can you tell us what else you do in your job there?
Oh, sure. Seems like we always have somebody in the training program, and air traffic control is always about on-the-job training. So we do a lot of the training. I also am part of the pilot outreach program. Sometimes I dabble in with some of the quality assurance work, and there's just so many opportunities. You should never be bored.
Now, you've been a controller for some time, and you've had several different jobs, I understand. Can you tell us about the different controller positions that you've held?
Well, I started air traffic control in 1989 at AKwx Center, and I worked there. They had only two specialties, east and west. I was on the east side. I took a little break and spent 2 years in the quality assurance department. Went back to controlling airplanes there. In 2000, I moved to Anchorage Tower. I just really wanted to look out the windows and see the airplanes that I was talking to. I stayed there for 14 years, and last year, not ready to retire, but a little bit tired, I moved to Merrill Tower, and that's where I will retire.
Is it a little bit slower pace at Merrill Tower?
Oh, no. With 3 flight schools and 2 helicopter schools and lots of pilots, it's not much slower. The hours are better, and it's fun. It's fun for me to work with student pilots. I really enjoy that.
So you work training air traffic controllers as well as training for the pilots who you're controlling.
Sometimes, yes.
How did you get interested in becoming an air traffic controller?
I always knew I was destined to be in aviation somewhere. I got my pilot's license. I went to school for airplanes. And one day a friend of mine saw an ad in the paper and said, hey, they're hiring air traffic controllers off the street. And I took the test, and I ended up getting hired and moved to Alaska. And that's how everything seemed to fall into place for me. It's a perfect job.
And what were you doing before you took the test?
I was working at a major FBO in the Southwest, and I just knew I needed to be around airplanes, whether I was washing them, fueling them, or just watching them.
And how did you get started in aviation initially?
I'm not really sure. I think it was just that never-ending desire to be out at the airport, hanging on a fence, watching, looking up at the sky, wondering what those contrails were all about.
Wow, and now you've got one of the best viewpoints watching those airplanes in Anchorage.
I do. I have the best office space in the city.
You mentioned that you're a pilot. Do you think that helps you as a controller?
Oh, definitely. I can really empathize with those student pilots. I remember the first time I had to go to a tower-controlled airport to do my mandatory 3 takeoffs and landings. I was shaking. I was scared to death to talk to me. I empathize with them. I do. Yeah. And plus, I understand the dynamics of flying an airplane and all the things that are going in, and then having to listen to controllers. Yeah.
Oh, sure. It can be overwhelming.
Sometimes, yeah.
What kinds of characteristics do you think make a good air traffic controller?
Well, I think you need to be able to multitask. I think you need to be able to communicate. You definitely have to be a team player. Aviation is about being a team player, whether you're working with people in a very high-stressed, closed environment in a tower, or you're working with pilots. We're all on the same team. Aviation safety is the #1 goal, and that requires you to be a team player.
And you bring up a good point. Being a team player is also being a good manager of resources. So the CRM principles in taking advantage of not just what's in the airplane's cockpit, but all the resources that are outside and the folks that are available to help.
True story.
Which it would include air traffic controllers.
Definitely.
What's your favorite part of the job?
Well, besides looking out a window all day, I just really enjoy that sense of accomplishment at the end of the day, whether I'm helping a VFR pilot to come back who might be disoriented, or I'm helping a student pilot clearing them for takeoff on their first solo. It's the little joys like that just really make it very happy, very special for me.
And the most challenging part of the job?
For me, the most challenging part of being an air traffic controller has always been the shift work. On 2 levels. First of all, you miss a lot of Christmases, you miss a lot of holidays with the family, you work a lot of birthdays. When you're 24/7, 365 days a year, you make sacrifices. If you know an air traffic controller, their family has made sacrifices for them to have that job. But the other sacrifice is the toll it takes on your health. The chronic sleep deprivation, the disrupted eating schedules. You have to start young and develop good habits to last in this career. And those those I think are the most challenging parts of my job, the shift work.
That's some good advice, though. Developing good habits and sticking to them throughout a career.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that information. We really
Thank you.
appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
It's really good for us as pilots to be able to put a face with the voice that we hear, and we appreciate your efforts to help keep us safe out there.
Thank you very much. And remind people they're more than welcome to come visit us.
I will. I think that's one of the greatest experiences pilots can have, understanding what goes on in an air traffic control tower, is to go up and visit.
Yes, I encourage it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hopefully folks will take you up on that offer.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you've enjoyed our show. If you enjoy hearing about aviation news and events that are happening in the Anchorage area, please tune in to Hangar Flying on Mondays and Fridays during Alaska weather. Thank you, and until next time, fly safely.
All right, see you again on Monday. Thank you. Today's sea ice edge is really not a whole lot different than it has been for most of the week. We continue to see light concentrations of ice across the southern edge there, and with the water being cold, pretty cold really, all the way down toward the Pribilovs, this could change very quickly. However, we keep having the pretty warm circulations just kind of chewing up the ice a little bit. So watch for some changes over the next week or so, and as long as we have this warm pattern sitting in the Gulf, things could remain kind of status quo there. Look for ice right up to about the southern coastline or the southern tip of Calgon Island. Otherwise, we'll continue to see light concentrations across northern Cook Inlet as well. So anytime you want to check the latest sea ice edge, you can do that at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php, all the way on the weather.gov site. Saturday's marine forecast shows winds fairly light across the intercoastal waterways, around 10 to about 20 knots there, 2 to 4 foot seas on the inside with a south and southeasterly flow. Southerly winds coming up the outer coastline, 15 to as high as 30 knots as you get up around Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather. As we get into Sunday, you'll notice winds lighten, diminish somewhat from east to west, 15 to 20 knots. 6 to 7 foot seas in the north, 8 foot seas closer to the Dixon entrance. Across the inner waterways, you're looking at southeasterly flow around 15 knots with northerlies coming out of the Lynn Canal into the areas around Frederick Sound. About 3 foot seas are expected on the inside for Sunday. Across south central, winds will remain light and in some cases variable on either side of the Barrens. 10 knots there with 3 foot seas in the west, 6 foot seas in the east, and that'll be the trend there for the western Gulf. Northeasterlies 10 knots with 2 foot seas on the inside of Prince William Sound and 15 knots on the eastern side of Kodiak Island. Southerlies there with 15 knots and a 7 foot sea. Winds are going to pick up a little bit more on Sunday, still talking about 15 to as high as 25 knots in the western Gulf. 10 knots continue inside of Prince William Sound. Northerlies coming down Cook Inlet there over the ice with 10 knots, and then picking up a little bit more south of Calgon Island and west of the Barrens and into Shelikof Strait with a 20-knot flow with a 5 foot sea on Sunday. For the Alaska Peninsula, 10 to 20-knot winds across the Bering Sea coast, 1 foot seas on the inside of Bristol Bay outside of the ice, and 20 knots there from the south and east with 6 foot to 7 foot seas across the Pacific. Most of that again will continue as we head into Sunday. A little bit more of a turn to the east and northeast as low pressure is backing up just a little bit more. 7 to 9 foot seas there on the Pacific side and 2 to 3 foot seas on the Bering side with a 15-knot wind. Now on to Saturday in the Aleutians. A north and westerly flow for most areas there, around 20 knots, except areas from Adak out toward Kiska. Look for a 6 foot sea on a variable flow around 10 knots or so. As we get into Sunday, very little change, and Adak to Kiska gets kind of back in the pattern here. 20-knot flow from the north and east with a 6 foot sea. All areas looking at 6 to 7 foot seas in the Bering Sea coast, the Pacific coast, anywhere around 4 to 5 foot seas there with winds from the north and east 15 to 20 knots. Now for the west coast, north and easterly winds will be the rule. Most areas looking at 25 knots or so. Heavy freezing spray is going to be an issue south of St. Matthew, Nunivak Island, and out toward the Pribilovs once you get south of the ice edge. So keep that in mind if you're heading out of St. Paul and northward into your favorite crabbing fishing hole there. So be careful out there. Northerlies at 25, again with some heavy freezing spray. North and easterly winds for Sunday. As we look at 20 to 25 knots in most areas. Northeasterlies coming out of the Kuskokwim Bay, 2 foot seas are expected. St. Paul and St. George also looking at 6 foot seas there for Sunday. Again, heavy freezing spray will be an issue. For Saturday in the North Coast, easterlies coming up a little bit more to 20 and 30 knots for the eastern Beaufort seacoast. Northerlies coming down the Chukchi seacoast at 20 knots. And once again, this area here from Wainwright all the way out toward Point Hope, we're talking about winter weather advisory for blowing snow. So poor visibility could be an issue at least through tonight and into early tomorrow morning. For Sunday, we get a little bit more of an onshore push. The winds are fairly light, 10 to 15 knots or so, but that starts to push onshore there with the next short wave, or what we call a weather disturbance, working across the north slope. East and southeasterly winds working across the central and eastern Beaufort seacoast. That's around 20 to 25 knots. This will be for Sunday. Recapping your weather tonight, low pressure is still driving all of the weather across the Gulf of Alaska, just kind of stirring the pot, as I like to say. Lots of little disturbances at the surface, guided by the system that's up aloft around the jet stream level. Below that, we'll just keep having wave after wave run around southeastern Alaska, make their way across south central Alaska, and then back into southwestern Alaska. And the interior should be on a fairly dry pattern because of this. Occasionally some moisture is getting stuck up across the western coast. Occasionally we have another disturbance dropping in from the west and moving to the east across the north slope. By and large, though, this is going to be a pretty dry pattern for most areas except for the Gulf Coast and southwestern Alaska. Spotty showers of snow across the Bering Sea coast. As we get into Saturday, you'll notice periods of rain mixed with snow generally in the morning for the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain. Rain is back in the forecast for parts of southeast and the south central Gulf Coast, as well as Prince William Sound. Pockets of clouds across the interior, but that's really about it. For the west coast, watch for some snow showers, maybe some blowing snow, especially across the north slope from Barrow down toward the Chukchi Sea coast and Wainwright, Point Hope, and Point Lay. By Sunday, really very little change. We have a little bit more of a temperature boundary across the west coast. We're still talking about some occasional rainfall for the central and eastern Aleutians. Kodiak Island, periods of rain mixed with snow across Prince William Sound, around Seward and points eastward toward Cordova and the northern sections of southeast. That's your Alaska weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.